Hey everyone, thanks for joining today's webinar, New Multimodal Safety Metrics from StreetLight and Ford Mobility. My name is Haley Golub and I'm the Product Marketing Manager at StreetLight Data. Before we get started, I want to let you all know that this webinar is being recorded. We'll send out a link to the recording and the webinar slides in about 24 hours. If you have any questions during the webinar, please ask us using the GoToWebinar's Q&A feature. You should see this module on the right-hand side control panel. Just type in your question and we'll get to it at the end of the presentation. Today, we have Laura Schewel, CEO at StreetLight Data, and Cal Copley, product owner of Ford Mobility Safety Insights, who will be presenting, and then I'll come back at the end to help out with Q&A. And with that, I'll pass it off to Laura.
Thanks, Haley, and thanks, Cal, for being here with me. All right, let's get started. So I can have the next slide, Cal. We have been thinking about safety for a while, and I think in a lot of the cities where we at StreetLight live, and probably a lot of the metro areas where you live, it's become increasingly clear that when you talk about safety, it's very important to talk about multimodal safety, and that we need something more than insights that just consider car crashes and vehicular volume. Crashes that involve pedestrians and cyclists are on the rise in almost every major metro area. So a multimodal lens was important. Next, please. In addition, we saw a lot of our customers struggling with having a pile of collision data, but not much additional data to help turn that data into insights by giving it context. And we also saw the process of joining crash data with lots of other sources of data, including our metrics out of StreetLight InSight, was incredibly cumbersome and basically shutting down the whole process of giving context to crash data. Next. So we also know that the ambition for most cities for safety has become really high. In fact, it's become zero with this concept of Vision Zero. And I think it's very clear that to achieve the zero in Vision Zero, what we need is proactive work on safety, not just reacting after something terrible has occurred. So all of these were the big picture ideas that we had been bouncing around at StreetLight when we and Ford started to talk to each other in the context of a US DOT safety contest. And I think some of the same ideas had been floating around in their head as well. So today, next please, Cal, what we want to tell you about is the solutions overview of our new integrative pair of products. And then most of the time, and the most exciting thing, is going to be Cal's demo of the new Ford Mobility Safety Insights product that has StreetLight data already woven in. We're going to talk about how once you've used Safety Insights, you can go deeper on the intersections or the interventions you've decided to deploy with StreetLight InSight. And then, of course, we imagine you all will have amazing questions, and we're happy to answer them. All right, let's get started. Basically, what we're offering is a bundling of two fantastic software that build on each other. The first that Cal will show you shortly is the Ford Safety Insights tool, which is about taking crash data, mixing it already, and blending it with other sources of data so that you can proactively identify hotspots and quickly get to countermeasures and cost-benefit assessments to know where to prioritize your safety interventions. We pair this with StreetLight InSight, which is a tool that, first of all, creates some of the data that feeds Safety Insights, but also once you say picked 10 intersections to work on, allows you to go really deep into iterative analytics about what happens at each of those intersections so you can make the right designs. And once you put something in place, lets you follow up and see how traffic patterns, bike patterns, car patterns, ped patterns may have changed so you can know if everything's working as planned. Next slide, please. All right. So with that, I'll give it to Cal to walk us through the concept behind Safety Insights.
Great, thanks a lot, Laura. So first off, just thanks to Laura and the team from StreetLight for hosting this webinar, including us from the team here at Ford to share a little bit about this exciting collaboration. So a little bit more background on myself before I jump into the details on Safety Insights. I'm leading this team here at Ford. And my background originated in data science as well as urban planning. So that's sort of the intersection I've worked at during my time at Ford and prior to my time at Ford as well. So really excited to be able to, build and create a solution like this that really marries, some of the best kind of best practice methodology around traffic safety analysis with some of the emerging capabilities in the big data space, and kind of making use of that data with data analytics. So with that, a little bit more detail on safety insights. Really our focus is on building a software solution that provides a more comprehensive view of traffic safety than is traditionally available. So we know that crash data is sort of the foundation for safety analysis and will, likely continue to be into the future. But we also know that crash data has some limitations. And so supplementing that with some exciting data like connected vehicle data, and also bringing in some of the traffic volume metrics that we're able to integrate from StreetLight, along with some additional sources. All of this together, again, unlocks that sort of bigger picture around traffic safety. So really the core for us, these three components on the slide, is sort of the main pillars that we've built out through our solution. So the first is just that, all of that groundwork that is required to pull together all these different data sources, streamline that, make it all available under one roof, that's a heavy lift. And we've heard from a lot of folks that, working with different data sources, they're in different locations, they're in different formats. Some, might be hard to get access to this data set or that data set. So that's really that first key hurdle, right, is bringing all that together. But of course, that only gets you so far, right, just pulling together data. The next step is, of course, beginning to make sense of that data. And that's where we've pulled in a lot of best practice methodology, and I'll get into a little bit more of the details on the next slide, but around being able to identify hotspots, identify areas of focus based on all of these safety data inputs. And then of course so you can look at some data, you can find some focus areas, but what we continue to hear from folks is, well, okay, finding problems only does me so much. I need to think about the solutions then to those safety focus areas that I'm identifying. And that's where what we've done is integrated a repository of safety countermeasure research, so you can begin to think about what solutions might make the most sense for a particular location you're focused on, and have some ready at hand indicators for things like predicted crash reduction, what that crash reduction would mean in terms of societal cost savings, really all of the kind of information you need to quickly and easily determine what solutions might be, again, best fit for a particular location. So a little bit more detail on that kind of three-step process I just outlined. So really the first step, we understand pulling together all of this crash data. There's a lot of opportunity to just be able to drill down to specific subsets of crashes, analyze different, maybe you want to analyze the bike and pedestrian crashes, maybe you want to analyze serious and fatal injury crashes, you want to look at weekdays or weekends, you want to look at certain time ranges. The ability to do all of that, again, under kind of this single solution here, really can simplify and streamline things and save a lot of time. The next component is, for us, it was really important as we built the solution out to focus on leveraging and sort of building on top of industry best practices for doing this type of work rather than trying to recreate the wheel. So there's a lot of outstanding work that's been done in the traffic safety analysis space over the course of decades. A lot of great methods for network screening and identifying hotspots and working with countermeasures and all of that kind of analysis tasks. There's great methodology that's outlined, but implementing that and automating it and streamlining those tasks, we've heard can be very time consuming, very difficult. So that's one of the key things that we've done is pulled in this sort of the best of doing this kind of work from a methodology standpoint by helping make it much more streamlined. And then of course the third component, so we're referencing the CMF Clearinghouse, which is a great repository of safety countermeasure research, integrating that into our solution and enhancing it with some on-the-fly calculations to localize the CMF values and CMF research to whatever particular location you're looking at, right? So we can tell you what the predicted impact would be for hundreds of different solutions for any particular location you're looking at, and then what that crash reduction would mean in terms of societal cost savings. We also provide some tools for calculating cost-benefit trade-offs of one solution versus another, time of return calculations, right? All of the kind of information you need to make more informed decisions around traffic safety. So a little bit more background on what we've been working on over the past year or so. So we were really excited to, coming out of kind of our or origination through the US DOT competition that Laura mentioned, we actually launched what we consider the beta version of our solution, and that was in November 2019. So just about a year ago, actually, now. So what that entailed was we collaborated with about 10 public agencies across the Metro Detroit area in Michigan, and we provided them access to the beta version of our Safety InSight solution, let them use it, and what we asked for was just feedback, what they like, what they don't like, how we could further enhance it, what value it's providing them. And so that pilot, the kind of beta pilot, ran from about November 2019 through about July, this past summer. So about 8 months or so. And it was a great process. We learned a lot about the solution and sort of what the value was. So a few things that really stuck out. One, we kind of just validated the usefulness of a solution that compiles all these data sources and makes them available as a great way to help save time and not have to search for different data and run complex analyses, crunching those data numbers over and over again. The second piece was really that we heard that there was some opportunity for, due to the streamlined nature of the solution and some of the analysis we allow for, some of the agencies were excited to potentially use this to speed up their funding application process for, state safety funding or other opportunities like that. So that was really exciting to hear. And then the final piece was just that the access to some of these newer, kind of more novel big data sources. So the one example here on the slide, the connected vehicle data that we're able to bring to the table from Ford's standpoint was really interesting when you juxtapose that with the crash data, because the crash data will tell you some things, but the connected vehicle data can be indicative maybe of near misses or of other types of safety events that maybe don't show up in the crash data. And so sometimes when you put the two together, it sort of just validated, the connected vehicle data validated what we saw with the crash data. And other times it appeared that maybe it was illuminating something that the crash data wasn't telling us yet. Maybe there was an emerging safety concern. So that was really interesting and something that we think there's a lot more potential in the future around that use of that data. So I've touched on the different data elements a little bit, but just to kind of clarify for everyone's sake, there's really three primary components here. So the first is the data that you all would bring to the table, right? So that would be the crash data that would come from a public agency that we're working with. So generally this is maintained by your state level DOT, or maybe you're getting access from like your local police department or such to your collision data. But that's really key input, right? That helps, we integrate that data and that helps unlock a lot of the capability from an analytical standpoint to make sense of those core kind of safety patterns. But then of course we're able to supplement that and enhance it with some of the other data elements. So the second bucket there, we're bringing to the table from Ford some really exciting connected vehicle data. So Ford has millions of connected vehicles on the road today that are actively capturing and transmitting really interesting data elements. And so from our standpoint, we're not really concerned about individual events or what any individual driver is doing, but instead that information at an aggregate level to understand trends of events such as harsh braking events or hard acceleration events or traction control events, forward collision warnings, lane departure warnings. These are all safety related events that can be indicative of corrective driving maneuvers or near misses, and can be really useful, again, to supplement that crash data and also be able to pull in that connected vehicle data in a more frequent fashion than we've heard a lot of agencies get maybe their crash data updated once a year, right? We can get more ahead of things with additional data like connected vehicle data. I mentioned we're also pulling in the countermeasure information, and really exciting to be able to integrate the StreetLight multimodal traffic volume metrics into the solution as well, which is a really key input when you're doing safety analysis, right? You need those exposure metrics to understand proportion of activity. That's really a critical component, right? So you could have two locations with 10 crashes each, but one gets 10,000 vehicles per day and has a lot of bike and ped traffic, and one only gets 1,000 vehicles per day and not as much bike and ped traffic. With that context, all of a sudden you're looking at different solutions maybe for what to do for those different locations. So that's the key inputs there. And then of course, through the bundled offering, there's also a lot more capability from the StreetLight side through the InSight platform to do, once you've maybe identified some hotspots within Safety Insights, to go dive into the details of trip attributes and traveler attributes, demographics, and more details around the mode split and such. So really being able to unlock all of this capability through the bundled offering is really, we think, a great value. So with that, I'll pass it back to Laura.
What we saw so many of our clients doing was extracting a ton of analytics, say about car, bike, and ped volumes from our data, agonizingly trying to blend it with all their crash data, and then coming back to StreetLight at the end. So we've really tried to smooth that process for everyone with this partnership. So say once you've run through your amazing Ford Safety Insights tool and used the StreetLight data that's already built in and blended it with the FSI data and blended it with the crash modification factors, and everything has, you have your top 10 locations. We all know that just knowing the top 10 locations doesn't instantly turn into implementation. And so what you can do with this bundle is come back into Insight and say, hey, okay, so if I'm really going to say modify the signal timing, I need to understand turning movement counts. I need to understand bike volumes and their turning movement counts. I need to understand the speed of the cars. I need to understand origins and destinations to really implement this plan. So we're really excited that it's not just the two tools feeding data into each other, but really developing a workflow that can take you from the concept of wanting to make your streets safer all the way through designing the thing that's exactly going to happen. All right. So there are a lot of locations and a lot of ways to prioritize investing in safety. Vision Zero is, of course, the word that's on everybody's lips, and this is critical for thinking about your Vision Zero initiatives. Complete Streets policies, I'm really excited about too, because it really hammers home the idea that this is not just about car safety, but bike and ped and how all these different modes interact together. And lastly, funding is critical to get this done, especially in an era where a lot of public agencies are seeing some budget shortfalls, just in a time when that's really not what we and y'all need. So understanding how to spend those dollars wisely, I think, is a great way to think about the value of being proactive, as Cal was saying, instead of reactive about safety. All right, so now Cal will give us a really cool demo.
All right, thanks, Laura. So before I go ahead with the demo, just a quick kind of heads up. So this is I'm gonna play a quick video. It's about just over 3 minutes or so. It'll give you a good glimpse into the capability within the Safety Insights solution. I'll talk over kind of what's going on as we go through the demo, but I just wanted to mention, again, this is gonna be about 3 minutes or so. We would love to be able to spend more time with folks. If there's interest and follow-ups, feel free to please reach out, and we'd love to spend much more time going through all the details on the demo. There's so much functionality here, right? It's hard to do it justice in just a few minutes, but I think it'll give you a good sense of what the capability is, and hopefully triggers a lot of thoughts for follow-up questions and things that, again, we'd love to dive into with folks into more detail if there's interest. So with that, I will click play here. So the first step is you've got obviously the map interface. You've got your data layers on the left here. This is a web application, by the way, so everything's cloud-based. All the data is hosted secure in the cloud. So you can, of course, filter down by different time ranges, different days of the week, different months, different years of data, different time ranges, however you want to kind of slice and dice the data based on what analysis you're looking at. There's different road characteristics and such you can also drill down into. Here then we're looking at some crash data as well. So lots of attributes, right? You can drill down by crash factors, crash severity, crash type. In this case, we're going to drill down to bicycle, distracted driving, and pedestrian crashes. And just for context, we're in Ann Arbor, Michigan here on the map, home of the University of Michigan. So the next piece, right, so you're able to also layer in some of the vehicle event data I mentioned. Here we're showing some hard braking event data. There's hard acceleration there as well. We've got a number of additional signals that we're pulling into the application as well, but just showing hard braking, the kind of shaded road segment view there, side by side with the crash data, right, so you can get a sense of kind of that comparison. And then what we're doing now is running the hotspot analysis. So that's the network screening algorithm. One of the methods outlined in the highway safety manual. Happy to get into more details of kind of the algorithm. There's pros and cons of lots of different approaches. But of course, you can then drill down into specific hotspots if you want to. You saw before we had the list view as well of all the hotspots that were identified. You can export that list as well. But here, so we're looking at the kind of crash profile for this particular location. So you can get the breakdown of, for the crashes here, you know, what's the time of day breakdown, what's the crash factor breakdown, all the information you might need to fully understand this location, and then jump into the countermeasure portion of the application where you can think about, okay, there's hundreds of solutions I might want to consider, which ones might make the most sense for this location that we're drilled down into. So there's all sorts of different filters here you can see at the top. So you can drill down, you know, based on these hundreds of solutions. You say, okay, well, we were analyzing bike and ped crashes, so maybe let's look at bicycle and pedestrian oriented solutions, right? And so that's what we've just done. Now we've got a much more manageable list of solutions. And so lots of information about each of these, the CMF value, and then what you can do once you've chosen a few that you're interested in, you can add them to a report as showing on the screen here. And then what that does is automatically generates a countermeasure report, which just gives you kind of the quick summary of, okay, for this location, these are the solutions that we're considering. This is the predicted impact in terms of crash reduction, societal cost savings. And you can see here, you can also then come in and quickly do some cost benefit calculations, some time of return calculations, just based on, you know, inputting a few numbers from your side. And you can save those values. Those are available in your report as well. You can print it, you can share it out, you can bring it to a council meeting and kind of have, you know, the discussion on, you know, where do we want to invest our dollars for the greatest, you know, safety impact, and make, you know, really run all these scenarios and, you know, trade-offs before you invest a single cent, before you put a shovel in the ground, right? This is information that arms you to have those conversations, to think about, you know, what's going to have the greatest impact for us. So I know that was a lot, all in about 3 minutes. Again, you know, there's a lot more there underneath, you know, kind of all that we just showed. So happy to, again, dive into more details as folks are interested. So with that, I will pass it back to Laura.
Great. All right. So imagine I'm the planner in Ann Arbor. Oh, and by the way, I once took the train from Chicago to Ann Arbor, and it's one of the most fun things. I recommend everybody do it if you're going to go to Ann Arbor and then walk across this intersection that we're going to make safe. Okay. So now imagine the city council meeting has happened. They brought forth all these really cool countermeasure reports, and we said, you know what? Ingalls and Huron, there were a lot of different crosswalk options that came up on that countermeasures report, and that's what we really want to think about. So now it's my job to get specific. So I've gone back into StreetLight InSight and I've said, okay, Ingalls and Huron, that intersection is a little red dot kind of in the middle of my map. And what we're showing is for people, pedestrians who are experiencing this intersection, which we've identified as a dangerous one, where are they going? And we're looking for a typical day, but of course we can slice it by morning versus afternoon, because I suspect there's a little bit of directional flow going on here. What we see is that most of the pedestrians, you do have broad coverage, but we're mostly looking north and a little west. So this really helps me understand some important nuances of the pedestrian crosswalk. First of all, do I need it all 4 roads? Can I do it on one, maybe the east-west, and then the next block over have a north-south? It kind of looks like I can. That might allow me to get a lot of pedestrians to where they need to go safely, maybe on a slightly different path, but would also allow me to spend less money, because as we know, my budget's been slashed because poor Ann Arbor never gets the money it needs for transportation safety. So that's the type of thing I can start to learn as I really think about the details of implementing my new crosswalk plan. On the next slide, I always think it's interesting, people who are doing pedestrian safety often tend to be stuck in the world of pedestrian data, and people doing car safety are in the world of car safety. The problem is when they interact. So here we're looking at speeds, vehicular speeds on the roads that we're talking about routing these pedestrians across. And one of the things we see is that some of the segments to the west have quite high speeds. We see sometimes of day the average vehicle is in excess, or 30% of the vehicles are in excess of 50 miles per hour on these roads. So if my plan was to route people west then north, maybe now I've put a little check on my plan. Maybe it would save money, but maybe if I can go up 7th instead of Main, that's going to be a better option because I'm going to have less interactions with these super high speed vehicles. So these are the ways that once you've got your mandate, your short list of some really good impact measurements, you can have deep dives to make those plans to something really specific and concrete. Yeah, so what Cal is showing you is the distribution we see on Main. That brownish bar says, looks like 20% of folks driving on North Main are going more than 50, which might be a problem for several reasons, but it's definitely going to be a problem for pedestrian safety and maybe makes me not want to route my pedestrians there. All right, I think that is all we have. Please send us questions. I'm sure there are many because, as Cal said, he went incredibly quickly through what is a really impressive piece of software.
Yes, thanks, Laura and Cal. And please submit them, as we mentioned, on the right side of the screen in the Q&A feature. We'll start going through them and continue to keep submitting questions, and we'll answer them as they come in. And so the first question we have looks like this one is for Cal. Can you list all the types of Ford vehicle data that's available in this application? I think they're referring to the connected vehicle data and maybe what's coming down the line.
Yeah, certainly. So there's a set of about 8 different signal types that we're focusing on for the initial kind of offering here. So those 8 signals are things that we've identified as safety related connected vehicle events. So there's, as you might imagine, there's hundreds of different, event categories. Generally, we tried to narrow in on the ones that have some application from a safety perspective. So those include harsh braking events, harsh acceleration events, harsh cornering events, so like a harsh turn, traction control events, lane departure warnings, forward collision warnings, anti-lock braking events, so ABS activations, and blind spot detection warnings. So I think I covered all 8 there. But so that's the set of events that we're including within the application to start. Again, there's tons of opportunity beyond that in a few aspects. One, as we get more and more of these vehicles that have connectivity enabled on the road, there'll just be a greater volume of the data, which is really exciting to just get more and more trends and reach out to areas that potentially are less densely populated. We can start to see more opportunity to analyze trends there. So that's one. And the other piece is just there's always opportunity for new event types to show up, and especially as vehicles continue to evolve. So you think about some of the more recent like ADAS features, things like automatic emergency braking, right? So that could be really interesting to understand potentially something like distracted driving, right? So you think about there's harsh braking from driver initiated harsh braking. Then there could, on some vehicles now they have automatic emergency braking, so that's vehicle initiated harsh braking. When maybe the driver didn't recognize that they had to brake, the vehicle has this capability now to to apply those brakes, and so that's a crash avoided very likely. And we want to be able to understand some of those things. So while that's not something we're including right away, that's an example of where there's a lot of exciting potential into the future as well as we look at different connected vehicle signals.
Great, thanks, Cal. We have a ton of questions coming in, which is great. A bunch about countermeasures. So this one's for Cal as well. Do the countermeasure suggestions respond to just the crash data or also the hard braking events?
Yeah, great question. So the countermeasure information is based right now on the crash data, right? So there's a lot of great kind of, again, methodology that outlines how to connect crash data and profiles with countermeasure information. Not so much from how to link up connected vehicle events with countermeasures, though we're beginning to try to research that relationship, right, in terms of understanding how these vehicle events are correlated with crash outcomes or correlated with crash patterns. Can they be predictive or act as that leading indicator? And we think there's a lot of exciting potential then to tie that into the safety planning process as far as hotspot identification, working with countermeasures and such. But at this time, we're tying up in terms of the hotspot identification and the countermeasure information that really relies on the crash data, and the connected vehicle data acts as that supplemental layer of insight. So that's really the kind of key connection there. The countermeasure information can be really useful though as you're thinking through. So one of the other things we do is not just tying in the countermeasures with the crash profile. We're also looking at, so countermeasures, those that have been studied and that are available in a source like the CMF Clearinghouse, they have applicability criteria, right? So they some countermeasures are only intended for highways, or are only intended for urban, intersections, or are intended, right, for certain types of infrastructure environment. And so that's one of the things that we check for, is not just what's the crash profile and what's the countermeasures and doing some calculations, but we look at the applicability of each countermeasure, and then we compare that to what we know about the location you're looking at, and we kind of do a first pass of eliminating countermeasures that are not applicable given the location you're looking at and given what we know about that location. It's a feature that we have called smart filtering. It's something you can toggle on and off, but it's just sort of a first pass, right? It's not perfect by any means. It's not giving you recommendations per se, but it's helping you kind of narrow that list to things that might be relevant given the location you're looking at.
Great, thanks, Cal. So we have a question that you hinted on in the beginning of the presentation about what are the concepts such as safety performance function and level of service safety, or how are the highway safety manual, how is all of that stuff incorporated into this?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different methods for like hotspot identification, network screening, right? I think, I've seen lots of lists. There's upwards of 13 different methods maybe that are outlined in the HSM. The primary one that we've implemented is excess crash rate above expected with a EB adjustment. So essentially what we're looking at, or what we're helping identify, is those locations where there are more crashes, or a higher crash rate, I suppose, than we would expect given the characteristics of that area. So we're generating a model based on the characteristics of every location, every location in that jurisdiction that's being analyzed. So we take into account traffic volume, speed limit, length of the road, number of lanes, whatever is available, and we generate that model to calculate an expected crash rate for each of those locations, compare that to the actual crash rate, and then those areas with the greatest difference between what we would expect and what actually occurred there, those become your hotspots. So that's one method. That's the one that we've implemented. And we know that there's pros and cons to lots of different methods. The loss method, there's a variety of others as well. Some folks just use high crash locations, right? And that's where they want to focus. And maybe there's some benefit to that. But over time, we do hope to build in a variety of different approaches so that you could choose, maybe whatever algorithm or approach fits your needs for a particular analysis. But again, that excess over expected with the EB adjustment is the one that we've implemented to start.
Got it. Thanks, Cal. And there was a couple questions that came in that I'm going to group together for Laura, so she's going to tackle them all at once. But there was a question about, is this product aimed at pedestrians and bicyclists, or does it include automobiles too? And then there was another question about bicycles and pedestrians that we're going to tack onto this, which is, how does StreetLight distinguish a pedestrian from a slow-moving motor vehicle, or a pedestrian from a bicyclist?
Great questions. So this absolutely includes automotive crashes and automotive data. We've highlighted bike and peds because I think there's just been it has been an under-measured behavior for this demo. But absolutely it covers automotive, car on tree, single car crashes as well. So in terms of how we infer the movement, and I see there are also some questions about sample size. So a lot of the algorithms that go into crash modification calculations, but more the expected crash rates, a lot of them have different types of volumes as inputs. For example, the volume of cars on this road, the volume of bikes on this road, the volume of peds on this road. And those three volumes in particular have been very hard to get calculated or get measured historically. Certainly very hard to get on every segment in the system, especially for bike and ped. So those are feeding, are behind the scenes of some of these calculations as well. And there's a lot more that can be built on it. In terms of how we know this much volume is bike, this much volume is ped, this much volume is car, there's a long answer, which you can read about in our bike ped identification methodology document. The short answer is we're following many, many millions of smartphones around, and they are all de-identified, opted in, and we have a suite of folks who walk around, bike around, bus around with their smartphones, and at the end of the day, tell us exactly what they were doing. And that group of people are our machine learning training set. So we learn what it looks like when somebody's walking and biking, and importantly, we differentiate it by context. So our algorithm to identify a biker or a pedestrian in a downtown urban environment where maybe the bikes and peds can go faster than the cars is totally different than the algorithm in a rural area or on a college campus like in Ann Arbor or anything like that. So basically we combine features including speed, but as we've just said, speed is not sufficient. We look at acceleration, how fast turns happen. We look at the entire trip, not just the moment in time. We look at the urban density. We look at the presence of sidewalks and bike lanes, all sorts of other features in our machine learning machine to determine, based on the context, what the mode of travel is and what the breakdown of different modes of travel is on a particular piece of infrastructure. Did I get to the full question, Haley?
Yeah, you got it. The 3 questions in one. Cool. And then another question for Laura. Someone had a question about how do I actually access this if I'm a current StreetLight customer?
What a great question. So it is a little confusing the way all this melds together, and that's because it melds together in a few different ways. But basically, you can, as many of StreetLight subscribers know, we have tiers. So we have like basics and multimodal. This will be a new tier that you can add on top of your subscription. But if you add it on top of your subscription, you get discounts because you were so smart and you did it as a bundled integration, not just buying them separately. Of course, you can still buy StreetLight InSight on its own. You could buy Ford Safety Insights on its own, but bundling gives you benefits, especially if you're already smart enough to be a StreetLight subscriber.
Great, thanks, Laura. We have a lot of questions, so we're going to take a few more, and then we can follow up with those that we don't get to. And so a question for Cal. Please explain how you would go about integrating Escape's crash database with your application. For instance, how often is the data refreshed typically?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's really dependent, right? So what we've heard as we've talked with different agencies, different folks in different states, is that crash data, while generally is in a very similar format and contains very similar information, there are some areas where their data maybe is updated weekly and they get, are constantly refreshing and they have access to some of the most recent data, and that's great. There are other places where we've heard, they wait and get their crash data refreshed on an annual basis, right? And maybe it's made available in slightly different formats and things like that. So the first step is really just evaluating what exists, right, in your particular jurisdiction. So you may have, data that we can pull in for the most recent 5 years and it's updated annually, and we can work through that process to set up kind of that update process. So ideally the data would be accessible via some kind of electronic download or API or some kind of interface like that we can work with batch file transfer, right? We can really, the short answer is there's some flexibility there, right? We understand that that's a data set where there's some nuance from place to place and from agency to agency, but we would work with each individual organization to, again, evaluate what exists, figure out if there's some cleaning up that needs to happen, and then the integration into the solution. We know there's a core set of data attributes that are really required to power a lot of what we just showed you, right? So we need to be able to geolocate the crashes. We need individual crash IDs. We need date, time. We need crash severity. We need crash factors. We need crash type. That, your particular crash data may vary in terms of exactly what those things are called, but generally every crash data set we've looked at has those attributes. And then there might be more stuff on top of that, which we can always think about, how does that provide value? Can we integrate that as well? But that's really the core set of attributes that we'd be looking for. And then our team would be the ones to actually once you provide access to the data, pull it in, integrate it, configure it, make sure it unlocks all of the capability that I just showed.
Great, thanks, Cal. And we have a couple questions coming in just about connected vehicle data. It sounds like people are super interested in that data set. And just they want to know, can you give us an idea of roughly, how many connected vehicles are there currently in major US cities?
Sure, yeah, so I agree. I mean, I think there's a lot of exciting potential around this data. So I'll give you kind of the rough estimate, which is I think recent counts are just over 3 million connected vehicles on the road today in Ford's data set. And so a little bit of context, when I say connected vehicles, what that means is a retail vehicle that's on the road that has an embedded cellular modem within it that's activated. And so the way Ford approaches this is through a completely consent-driven model. It's an opt-in model. So while Ford is committed to 100% connectivity with our new vehicles, meaning each vehicle has this capability to be connected, those modems are actually deactivated by default, and the consumer has to consent to having that modem activated. And there's lots of incentive for the consumer to do that. They get a lot of useful information about vehicle health alerts and driving behavior and such that can provide some value back to the individual driver. And then so from our standpoint, what we're interested in then is as those vehicles then are driving around, transmitting data, again, similar to kind of what Laura said around de-identification, we don't really much care about which individual created any individual event. We just care about the aggregate of those events from a safety perspective, and looking at individual road segments over some time bucket. What was the number of harsh brakes? What was the number of harsh corners, and et cetera? Being able to compare that then to the crash data. So that's really the key from the connected vehicle data standpoint. So I mentioned the 3 million plus number that's continuing to grow. What we've seen is over the past year plus, there's really been this inflection point of growth in terms of just the amount of data, the amount of vehicles on the road, and you'll continue to see that. So it's a really exciting time to look at how do we make use of this data, how can it provide value, because there's only going to be more and more rich insight that's possible as we move into the future. So another maybe point of context around maybe the Southeast Michigan area where we showed our beta, there's maybe in the realm of about 100,000 or so connected vehicles that were in our data set there, just to kind of give you a rough sense of what that would look like, a little bit more localized.
Great, thanks, Cal. Okay, so it looks like a lot of the other questions have been answered or tackled within the questions that you guys just addressed. I guess the last question, maybe just reiterate it because a couple of folks have been asking. It says the user or subscriber must supply their own crash data, correct? So maybe just emphasize that.
Yeah, great question. So yes, that's correct. So there's the few different kind of data inputs, and the simple way to describe it is, between Laura and myself here, Ford and StreetLight, there's the data that we're bringing to the table, and then there's the data that you would bring to the table, and that is the crash data, right? So the crash data, we integrate that helps unlock a lot of the capability within Safety Insights I just showed. But then of course there's all the capability from StreetLight that exists, that don't necessarily need crash data to power. And then there's all the interesting insight from the connected vehicle data side of things that we'd be happy to talk about, folks. If for some reason you don't have crash data, maybe there's still some interesting opportunity there. But really the core functionality that we showed in the demo requires crash data to help unlock that capability.
Great, thanks, Cal. And one more question, this one's interesting. They said, large cities aside, is the tool ready to provide safety solutions for smaller cities where there might not be any road or issues to fix yet, but they're more in the design process rather than redesign?
Very interesting. Yeah, so I think, we would love probably to take a look at, whatever particular location that might be. And one of the things that we tend to do when we're having, these early conversations with folks is a quick kind of coverage analysis of specifically maybe the connected vehicle data. And we could give you a sense of, hey, here's what exists around this area that you're looking at. And we can collectively take a look and say, okay, we think this will provide value, or maybe it won't. But the other thing you can always look at is, countermeasures. There's lots of great research on systemic safety solutions. There's a lot of great work that's been done just to kind of baseline as you're thinking about new development or expanding development in a kind of a more exurban or rural or maybe expanding area. There's a lot of great resources, a lot of them that we rely on and integrate into our tool to help you think about safety and maybe what solutions you might want to implement as you're doing the building rather than trying to retrofit something in. So there's certainly, I think, some opportunity there, but it would be in the details of the discussion, I think.
Yeah, and then Laura, if you have anything to add about how StreetLight can help out with that as well.
Yeah, so we have the same sort of penetration rates in small and large cities. Roads that don't exist yet are going to be an interesting challenge, but certainly we can look for roads that are similar in other parts of the country.
Yeah, I think they meant like issues that like areas where there's not a lot of crashes.
Yes, definitely. You could look at issues, for example, where you see rising pedestrian volumes on a space where cars are going very fast. Easy to scan for this. You can look for a place where you see those two things in conjunction with hard braking from Ford, then you've got a real priority location.
That's a great point.
Great, thanks. So I think that's all for now. And so if there's any other questions that trickle in, we will follow up with you separately. Wanted to thank everyone for joining the webinar today. Like I mentioned before, this has been recorded, so we'll send it out and we will do that in the next 24 hours. So we hope everyone has a great rest of the day. Thank you. Thanks, Cal and Laura.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.